She stood at the edge of the wedding hall for a moment longer than anyone noticed, as if checking whether she still belonged in a world that now looked like it was built from glass, gold, and polite judgment. Years ago, she would have been cleaning floors at this hour or hauling crates under flickering lights, pretending exhaustion was just another accessory she wore. 2 jobs had been her rhythm for so long that silence now felt suspicious, like something was missing. Her daughter had turned out nothing like the life she had fought through. Smart, soft-hearted, dangerously optimistic in the way only someone raised with real struggle could be. And now she was getting married into wealth so polished it practically reflected the ceiling lights back at themselves. The venue was the kind of place where even the air smelled expensive, and where people spoke slightly slower, as if words themselves had a price tag. Around the hall, guests mingled with practiced elegance. A few foreign delegates from an interstellar cultural exchange program stood near the side, tall, composed figures observing human ceremonies with polite curiosity. One of them tilted their heads slightly, scanning emotional patterns like data streams, clearly confused why so many humans smiled while quietly measuring each other's worth. She adjusted her simple dress. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. She had stopped trying to impress people a long time ago. Life had taught her that survival doesn't need an audience. Still, she could feel it, the subtle weight of being evaluated. Not loudly, not openly, but in glances that lingered a second too long. A server passed by and froze for half a heartbeat when he saw her face, then quickly moved on, as if remembering something he wasn't supposed to acknowledge. Strange. She dismissed it with a small breath. Tonight wasn't about her. It was about her daughter's happiness, even if the world around it felt like a stage built for people who had never missed a meal in their lives. Somewhere deep in the structure of this elegant empire, she knew systems were running, contracts were active, supply chains were flowing, things she had once unknowingly touched during sleepless nights between her 2 jobs, long before anyone in this room had ever said her name with importance. The first real crack in the atmosphere didn't come from music or laughter. It came from a voice that carried too much confidence for the moment it chose. Her daughter's new father-in-law had been drinking in compliments all evening, like a man slowly convincing himself he was the center of gravity in every room he entered. He stood near the main table, glass raised slightly, smiling in that practiced way people use when they are about to say something they think is clever but actually isn't. And then he turned his attention toward her. "She's the mother of the bride," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "A hard-working woman, yes, though I hear she spent most of her life doing low-class night jobs just to raise her daughter alone." The words landed with a soft, ugly precision. Not shouted, not aggressive, but carefully placed so everyone would hear and quietly agree. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone chuckled awkwardly and stopped halfway. Another pretended not to listen. The kind of silence that isn't empty, just carefully edited. He continued anyway, warming up now, like a man enjoying his own reflection. "It's admirable, of course," he added, tilting his head slightly. "But there's a difference between survival and refinement. Our family, well, we come from a certain standard." That word, standard, hung in the air like perfume trying to cover something rotten. The mother didn't react immediately. She simply looked at him, calm and unreadable, then took a small sip from her glass. That calmness irritated him more than anger would have. He had expected embarrassment, maybe even shame. Instead, he got silence shaped like patience. Around them, the alien observers subtly adjusted their posture, as if recalibrating emotional readings. One of them blinked slowly, projecting a faint translation overlay of human status hierarchy behavior, socially aggressive signaling during mating ceremonies. The groom looked trapped between embarrassment and discomfort, eyes flicking between his father and the woman who had raised the person he loved. Still, the father-in-law wasn't finished. He leaned slightly closer to a nearby group, lowering his voice just enough to pretend it was private while ensuring it wasn't. "People like that usually don't understand our world," he said casually. "But we make allowances today. It is, after all, a celebration." A couple of guests laughed too quickly. The kind of laugh that agrees without believing. The mother remained seated, composed. But somewhere in the background, unseen, unannounced, something in the venue's internal systems flickered once, like a forgotten memory trying to wake up. The shift in the evening didn't come with warning. It arrived in the form of an interruption so ordinary that nobody recognized it as fate. A sharply dressed coordinator stepped onto the edge of the reception floor, holding a sealed envelope and looking mildly panicked, the way people do when they realize they have entered the wrong room but cannot escape without consequences. He whispered something to a manager. The manager froze. Then, with the kind of forced professionalism that always cracks under pressure, the envelope was announced as urgent corporate documentation mistakenly delivered to this venue. The father-in-law, still riding the confidence of his earlier speech, immediately reached out. "I'll handle it," he said smoothly, as if even mistakes belonged to him. He tore the seal open in front of everyone. At first, his expression didn't change. Lines of financial terminology, audit codes, restructuring notes, standard corporate language. But then his eyes slowed. The smile faded not all at once, but in layers, like paint peeling off a wall that had been exposed to too much truth. The room didn't understand yet, but they could feel the change. Conversation softened. Glasses paused midair. Then came the part that made him blink twice. Bankruptcy restructuring confirmation. Emergency capital injection records. Long-term debt stabilization logs. And at the bottom, a flagged identifier tied to a silent investor network, one that had never been publicly disclosed. A quiet murmur began somewhere behind him, like the building itself was starting to gossip. He flipped another page faster now. Too fast. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something uncomfortable and human. The identifier code kept repeating across documents, linked through logistics, supply chains, and hidden funding routes that had once quietly saved his company from total collapse years ago. And then it connected. Not a name at first. Not fully. Just a pattern. Employment records. Secondary income channels. Night shift logistics partnerships. Old system access logs. His eyes lifted slowly. And for the first time that evening, he looked directly at her, not as a guest, not as a background figure, not as someone to categorize, but as something his mind had refused to compute. The mother. The room went unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Even the alien delegates stopped analyzing human emotion and simply stared, their interface displaying a single word. Inconsistency detected. Low status label conflicting with high impact economic anchor. And then, calmly, almost gently, she spoke for the first time since the humiliation began. "I believe," she said, "you're reading the part of my life you never bothered to ask about." The father-in-law tried to speak, but the sound that came out didn't match the man who had been dominating the room minutes earlier. It was smaller now, fragmented, as if his confidence had been scattered across the pages he was still holding. This must be some administrative overlap," he said quickly, forcing a laugh that nobody joined. No one responded. Not even politely. Because the room had already shifted. The guests who had spent the evening measuring status now looked like they were recalculating everything in real time. People who had nodded at his earlier arrogance were now suddenly very interested in their drinks, their shoes, or the ceiling decorations, anywhere except him. And then, slowly, something worse happened for him. They started looking at her differently. Not with surprise anymore. With recognition. Respect. Some even with cautious admiration, the kind reserved for people who quietly hold systems together while others take credit for standing on them. A senior business guest stood up first. Then another. A ripple of movement. Hall, not chaotic, but deliberate. Conversations broke into new directions, away from the man who had tried to define the room, and toward the woman he had dismissed. "Are you saying she was the one behind the stabilization funding?" someone asked under their breath. "That network saved 3 industries during that crash," another murmured. The father-in-law looked around, realizing too late that he had not just insulted a person, he had insulted a foundational piece of his own survival. The groom stepped slightly closer to the mother, protective without needing words. The daughter held her hand tighter, eyes glossy but proud, like she was finally seeing the full weight of what her mother had carried alone. Even the alien observers shifted again, their translation overlays updating rapidly. Human social structure update. One of them projected softly. Subject previously categorized as low-tier labor unit reassigned to critical infrastructure contributor. Emotional paradox. Observers experiencing corrective embarrassment. That almost would have been funny if the room hadn't already been drowning in it. The father-in-law attempted one last recovery. I didn't mean, I was just, there must be some misunderstanding. But his voice collapsed under its own lack of support. No one was listening anymore. Not because they were rude. Because he had become irrelevant in real time. The celebration didn't stop. It simply rerouted. Champagne glasses raised again, but not for him. Conversations resumed, but around her. Even the staff, who had been quietly watching all along, began moving with a new kind of certainty, as if instructions they had always followed were suddenly being understood in full clarity. She exhaled once, slow and steady, as if closing a chapter she never needed to read out loud. Not anger. Not revenge. Just completion. And in that strange, elegant silence that followed the collapse of arrogance, the wedding continued, just no longer on the terms of the man who thought he owned the room, but under the quiet gravity of the woman he never bothered to understand.